So 1987, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. A lot of people always confuse this with a Christmas movie, and I wonder, is it because there's not too many Thanksgiving movies?
Well, that could be it. Yeah, and it's got a lot of snow. I
A
guess
lot
at
of
a
snow,
glance,
yeah.
it looks kind of Christmassy. And I suppose the way we celebrate the holidays in the United States, everything from Thanksgiving to New Year's is like one long holiday.
Yeah.
So, although I, the warm-hearted nature of the movie, I guess, makes it appropriate for Christmas as well. You know, it's good for Thanksgiving, good for Christmas. It's a nice family type movie, with the exception of the fuck scenes.
Yeah. 18 fucks in 1 minute.
18 fucks, yes. Which I guess got it an R rating.
That's what gave it a tar. Yeah, it would have been PG. But I learned today that in Portugal, I think, they didn't care. It's still PG and they left all the fucks in.
Well, that seems to be a much more reasonable attitude because let's be honest, the word is not really, that shouldn't be the big deal, right?
Right.
No matter how many times you say fuck, it shouldn't get you an R rating unless
No.
it's like a Martin Scorsese gangster movie where the
Yeah.
gangsters are saying it all the time. But in this case, it's part of the joke, right? It's
Yeah.
in context, it's inoffensive, I would say.
You can start by wiping that fucking dumbass smile off your rosy fucking cheeks. Then you can give me a fucking automobile, a fucking Datsun, a fucking Toyota, a fucking Mustang, a fucking Buick, 4 fucking wheels and a seat.
I really don't care for the way you're speaking to me.
But yeah, it's funny how ratings work. I guess he must have wanted to have an R-rated film, right? Because he could have easily found a way. I know they said that Steve Martin took the movie, did the movie because of that scene.
Oh, that scene, yeah.
But still, it's kind of hard to imagine that it would be that difficult to get around using that word if he wanted to get a PG or PG-13. Yeah. There's really nothing offensive in the movie, to be honest. It's completely inoffensive. I don't know if it's as inoffensive as Home Alone, but in a way, I find that with its cartoon violence to be slightly more offensive.
Yeah.
Just because it's idiotic, and you know, I'm a fan of a lot of John Hughes' movies, but I've never been a big one for Home Alone. This one, I think, is probably my favorite.
Favorite John Hughes or just
a favorite John Hughes film?
Yeah,
and I think it's also my favorite Steve Martin film, I would say.
It's definitely my favorite Steve Martin, John Candy movies. Yeah. You know, between the two of them, not together, but even separate movies. It's also for John Candy, it's also between this and maybe Uncle Buck was really good.
Yeah, he was sort of building on
on
this one with Uncle Buck. Yeah, but you come to appreciate how good they were as actors, not just being funny guys, but Steve Martin and John Candy really give excellent performances, screen performances here. Even in the more dramatic scenes, they're very good.
Yeah, even in that opening scene, which is pretty much lays the plot out with not saying a word.
Right.
When they're waiting on I'm assuming their boss or whoever they're working for.
Played by William Wyndham.
Yeah, I guess he's trying to pick a magazine cover or something.
That's right. Yeah.
Doesn't really matter. That's just funny that he like gets ready to say something and goes right back to it. But yeah, right. the way they lay the whole plot out with not saying a word, I thought that was great. Good opening for the movie.
Apparently an experience that John Hughes had himself, where he was rushing to get home for the holidays and got sidetracked because of weather or whatever, and ended up what should have been a quick plane trip ended up becoming several days of,
I think it took him like 5 days to get from Wichita to Chicago.
Yeah. So, and I can certainly, I think I have mixed feelings about getting lost or getting delayed in this way, because in a way, I always feel that there's a certain sense of peace that comes over me when I get lost or when I get delayed. I don't travel by plane very often, but if you're ever traveling someplace and you find the train or the car or whatever you're on has been detoured or it's broken down, for me, there's a certain peace that comes over me, because I can say, well, nobody can blame me now. Usually I'm late because I'm late.
Yeah.
This is God's work. It's out of my hands. And it actually makes adventures like this kind of fun in a way. I mean, when I was watching this movie this time, I was sort of wishing that it would go on go on longer.
Yeah, when I was watching today, I was thinking, I'm glad I don't travel for work. But then you get halfway through and you're like, you know what? They're having a good time. This
There
seems like
is,
something to
yeah,
be fun to get snowed in and have to try to get from an airport to a bus station and all that.
right.
They make it pretty fun.
It has this what's going to happen next quality to it,
Yeah.
which makes life exciting, if nothing else. The Blu-ray that just came out, I guess it's a 4K Blu-ray.
Hmm.
The Blu-ray, the print that they're using, whatever work they did on it, has not been getting great reviews, but the disc itself might be worth having because it has like an hour of extra footage,
Extra footage, yeah.
some of which looks very funny. And this is one of those rare instances where I'm really interested in seeing the extra footage because it might be actually
Yeah,
worthwhile.
I learned today that I guess everybody's always been wanting this John Hughes cut of the film because apparently the original
Yeah.
cut was 3 hours.
Right.
But I guess they just figured out that John Hughes always shot a
Oh,
lot of film. Even if it was just set the camera up and just let him go.
right.
We may not even use it, but it'll keep them going or something.
Yeah.
So I guess so the version we have now is his version. There
He
is,
was very insistent,
yeah.
apparently, that he wanted, because he was working with one of the great editors, Paul
Oh, yeah.
Hirsch, who actually edited Star Wars, among other films. So he was, and there are certain moments in the film that are particularly memorable that are the result of the editing, like the ending. And I was watching it this time, and I had no idea about any of this.
Yeah, I
But
didn't
when
know
was
either
watching,
until
I was
today.
watching this, and I thought to myself as I was watching it, this is so dependent on the editing, the way the scenes are arranged. I wonder if this was something that they did in the editing. And sure enough, it turns out that's not the way the ending of the film was written. They used footage of Steve Martin apparently sitting on a train between takes.
Between takes, he
a
didn't know
shot of
he
his
didn't know he
face.
was being filmed. Yeah.
And they used that. And maybe that's what gave me the feeling, because it did seem so natural. It did almost feel like something that had been caught on with him unawares.
Yeah.
But that to me is the sign of genius, because if in other hands they might have had that whole thing play out right on the platform when Steve Martin is saying goodbye to John Candy. They might have had that scene of him asking, "Why aren't you getting on the train? Or why are you staying here?" And that would have ruined it. The fact that Steve Martin is running these things through his head after he's already left the guy, and that causes him to go back, adds to the feeling of him being a good person. Right?
Yeah.
He doesn't, when he suddenly realizes all the hints that have been dropped through the movie about John Candy's wife, and that's enough to make him go back, even though I'm sure at that point in this adventure, the last thing he wanted was
To
another.
go back, yeah.
Right. But that is very touching. Even
Yeah,
now,
what I liked about those scenes with the flashbacks where they were kind of like it started off with his family,
right,
previous Thanksgiving, and then he starts thinking about John Candy. So it's like now this guy's part of his Thanksgiving memories
right,
from now on. That'll be part of it now.
which is a very good message, particularly for a holiday movie, right? That somebody should have that level of generosity. Let's be honest, in the real world, that would really be a reach.
Yeah.
No matter how much time you spent with a guy like that, once you were rid of him, you'd say, he's out of my hands. It also makes his story, John Candy's story, that much more sad, because apparently he's just a guy that roams around on trains and buses.
Yeah. Probably don't even have a home.
When he says at one point, "I haven't been home in years," that may be the case. He spends all his time traveling around selling his curtain rings.
Yeah.
But so that's makes him a sad character. And at the end of the film, they had to make a decision as to who we should care about here. Should we care about the relationship between Steve Martin and his wife, or Steve Martin and John Candy? And they wisely chose Steve Martin and John Candy.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the friendship that the audience is interested in. They're not really so much interested in the
No.
wife, because apparently there was more stuff that had been shot with her wondering if Steve Martin, I guess, talking to other members of the family and wondering if Steve Martin was having an affair.
I heard somebody say something. I was like, well, wait a minute. I didn't get anything, but I guess it was a bunch of stuff they cut out, I guess.
Yeah, apparently a lot of but a little bit of a hint of it when she says what's going on, like she sounds like she's suspicious when he calls.
Yeah.
Those scenes when he calls are cut very precisely. They don't linger on any of that stuff, which is appreciated, at least as far as I'm concerned, because that would make there are certain traps that you could fall into that some people would probably automatically go for because it gives you an opportunity to fill in the story and to fill up the screen time. And there might also be a temptation to say, well, we hired this actress, we did all these scenes with the family, we got hired all the kids. Let's make that a part of the film, or let's make it doesn't need to be, and it shouldn't be, right?
No.
That's
I remember
just
when
his goal. It's like the MacGuffin of this movie.
a couple of months ago when I wrote a little review about it, and in the review I was saying how this movie doesn't waste any time. Not one second of film is wasted. Of course, then I found out he had a 3-hour version that he had to whittle down, but knowing now that was still probably not even part of, that was just like stuff he was just filming just for
I think
giggles, I guess. But still, this movie is like just the movement of this movie. Just goes right along.
One of the videos on YouTube that was talking about this film sort of demonstrated the point by showing the unedited scene where Steve Martin is arguing with the ticket taker about not being in first class. And then she says, you know, she has the final word, and there's a scene of him sort of schlepping down the aisles. Well, everybody is, you know, all the kids.
Got the crying baby and stuff like that. Yeah.
And in the theatrical cut, they go right from his face to John Candy's face.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what a surprise. We'll talk about luck. That is it. They turn that moment into another joke because the audience laughed at that. As soon as they saw John Candy's face, you know, I guess his line is, what can go wrong now?
Yeah.
And then next thing you see is John Candy. And John Candy is funny because he's such a real character. I mean, I know people like
Oh
that.
yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking. That I was like, everybody knows Adele Griffin.
And his name is perfect too. It sounds like the name of a hardware store or something.
Yeah.
Come to Dell's.
But right before this was probably one of my favorite jokes, and it's not even a joke, but for some reason it worked, and I don't know why no one else has done this before. Whenever Steve Martin looks up and sees John Candy, and he's trying to remember, where do I know this guy from? He imagines that cab door just in front of him in the airport. And it's just like it's mixed, you know, he's not remembering the scene from the movie that you know what I'm saying? He's just mentally putting the cab door in front of John Candy in the airport. And I think that's like brilliant.
Yeah, well, the fact that John Candy's character becomes an obstruction in Steve Martin's life early on. It's his trunk that he falls over.
That he trips over, yeah.
So that's clever too. The way that they set the story up, it almost seems like inevitable that he's going to get stuck with this guy.
Yeah.
And that makes it funnier, you know. The long trips and the strange things that happen and the strange people that you meet. I mean, there's a lot of comedy there. I don't know why we don't have more movies like this, to be honest. But it'd be interesting to see the extra hour of footage. I saw just a few scenes, and it looks like a lot of the stuff it looks like it could be quite funny. So
yeah, I saw a couple of the other scenes like extended in the hotel room, and there's some stuff missing that they kind of had stuff left in the theatrical cut, like John Candy's black eye at the end.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, well, where'd that come from? Because it was a scene they cut out.
Well, little things like that. I like him talking about when they get into bed and he's talking about who would be stupid enough to leave. What did you think would happen when you left the beer on the bed, on the vibrator bed? And I thought that was actually probably funnier than showing him doing it.
Oh yeah.
The fact that there's all these things that have happened that we didn't get to see, more horrors that he had to deal with, and now he's sleeping in a bed that's soaked with beer.
Yeah, the one scene I wish they would have left in because it makes more sense. Like I was watching today, I was like, how does Steve Martin not notice the sink and all the used towels getting in there? There was a scene where John Candy comes in after he's in the shower. I think, they probably, I mean, it still works. I'm still laughing every time I watch it. But it's just, for some reason, it just feels weird that, you didn't see all that when you came in.
Yeah, the problem is that the editing is suggesting that this is something that he could conceivably discover after he gets out of the shower. But people would, if that had been there before he got into the show, he would
You
have
would have
seen
seen
it.
it. Yeah.
And if he was in the show while it was happening, he certainly would have heard it. So it
Yeah.
wouldn't have come as a surprise. That might be one instance where they said, yeah, it sort of reduces that scene, but maybe in the overall movie, maybe to have a very extended scene of John Candy goggling
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, it
Maybe
works while you're watching it. You just, when you think about it afterwards, you're like, well, wait a minute. But when
Right.
you're watching, it's just, his reaction. Steve Martin just makes that scene,
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's very good. And yeah, I was surprised when I first saw this movie because he had the reputation of being the wild and crazy guy.
Yeah.
And in this, he's playing a kind of an uptight, kind of conservative fellow, As a matter of fact, they even got him in a hat. Nobody was wearing hats in late 1980s. I don't think you saw it. No matter how much of a conservative businessman, I don't think there were many people going around.
Yeah.
Certainly people his age with a hat on,
He kind of reminded me of the character from The Outer Towners, which he had later on done a remake of.
Oh, is that
But
right? Yeah.
he's reminding me of the original movie with I can't remember his name now that I
Jack
want to say.
Lemmon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what he kind of reminded me of in this movie.
Yeah, well, it sort of makes sense that he follows in Jack Lemmon's tradition because he is good at playing that kind of character. He doesn't have to always be doing the crazy stuff. His first couple of movies like The Jerk and the Man with No Brain or Man with Two Brains or whatever it was, the Carl Reiner movie. Those he played rather, broad characters, and the films themselves were kind of broad and cartoony in a way.
Yeah.
Actually, both of those films, I guess, were Carl Reiner movies, if I'm not mistaken. But I guess other people must have seen his strengths as an actor pretty early on, because I know they said that he was considered, maybe just briefly, by Stanley Kubrick for Eyes Wide Shut. Not the version that he ended up doing.
Yeah.
He had that movie in development for, I guess, decades. But at one point when Steve Martin was starting to make movies, I guess he came to Kubrick's attention, and Kubrick considered him for the main character. I could see it. I think that could work.
Yeah.
I have to say, as much as I like Steve Martin, and I remember being an old man, I remember when he was such a sensation as a stand-up comic. He had some comedy albums that came out that were like tremendously successful, and his popularity was such that he was almost like on the level of like a rock star, But I never really liked too many of his movies other than this one.
Yeah.
A lot of his movies I always thought were, he had a hard time because it wasn't his fault, because he's just a performer in them, but there was difficulty in trying to balance the crazy stuff that the sort of absurdist stuff that he was famous for, and the needs of a movie, of a movie with a story, and that's hard to do. I mean, some folks do do it well, like Mel Brooks and the Monty Python guys, but usually, if you're going to have a movie that feels more than just a sketch, like this movie feels like a real movie. It feels like a real
Right.
story. You really care about the characters, even when it isn't funny. It's interesting and entertaining. But a lot of times, folks stumble on that. And maybe even in some of other John Hughes' films, he stumbled on that balance between the crazy comedy and just making it real and making it believable as a story.
Well, with this one though, he basically just has to play it straight, and that's what makes it funny. Well,
Yeah.
from his part, and then John Candy's carrying all the wackiness weight.
Right. And even the stuff he's doing, he's just an annoying person.
Yeah.
It's not, and actually, I could imagine somebody making the case and saying, well, he isn't even really that annoying.
Not
It's
really.
just that
No.
Steve Martin is a particularly unreceptive person at that
Well,
moment.
I think that's their kind of character arc they both have. You know what I'm saying? Because when you first see it, you're like, you're on Steve Martin's side. You're like, oh, this character's so annoying. I'd hate to be stuck beside him. Then you get to the hotel and Steve Martin goes off on him, and you're like, well, what an asshole. Then you feel bad, but then by the end, you're just like, you like both characters.
Yeah, and I'm glad when he does go off on him in the hotel room, and chews him out. Some of that stuff is very funny, by the way, some
Yeah.
of the things he says. But they edited out his apology, apparently, in the
Yeah.
original version. And I think that was wise, because the apology should come later, right? He's not done driving this guy crazy, and Steve Martin shouldn't be apologizing right at that moment. That's something that should come at the very end.
Yeah, what was great about that scene, though, the way they have it in the movie now is they get into this argument. John Candy says, he gives his rebuttal, gets back into bed, and Steve Martin realizes,
Right.
where am I going to go? So let me get. So they were like a married couple. They just had a fight,
Right.
and the guy's got nowhere else to go, so he might as well just slowly get back in the bed.
Right.
And then they wouldn't have that apology till the next morning. So that's what made that great. It's like, they're a married couple already.
Right. Yes. Well, a lot of times with relationships that last, there's a realization that we have no place to go.
Yeah.
We're stuck with each other. And the fact that he gets into bed, that's essentially a concession. That's admitting that he was wrong. And and later, when John Candy is the one that's out in the cold, sitting in the car,
Yeah.
just probably the stupidest thing that John Candy did, burning the car to a crisp.
Yeah.
But when Steve Martin comes to the door and just says, you're going to freeze to death out there, that's the sort of light touch that you need with that. You don't want the drama aspects of it to become, shouldn't become teary or sentimental.
Yeah.
Right? There should always be a certain amount of irritation and distance, because that's a much more enjoyable thing. If two people get on each other's nerves, and yet they constantly are forced back together, that's much more interesting than having, Steve Martin have a sudden revelation about what a bad guy he is, and let me try to be nicer to this fellow. No, that doesn't happen until the very end.
Yeah.
And so John Hughes, and he actually turned out quite a few pretty memorable comedies in his time.
Oh yeah, I can't think of a John Hughes movie that I don't like.
Yeah, they were all pretty solid, pretty entertaining, and they had a heart. They had a heart, brain, and a heart, which is very often not what you see in comedies, and particularly in the '80s. I mean, we went through a time in the '80s when, well, I agree with Quentin Tarantino. The '80s were not a good decade for movies, but a lot of the comedies tended to be, whether they were teenage sex comedies or gross out comedies, they were kind of stupid, and when you look back at them now, some of the stuff might still be funny, but you sort of feel embarrassed watching them because, they don't have any sense of humanity. And that's what this movie has, and makes it much more easy to watch it over and over again over the years. I guess this has become a holiday tradition for a lot of people.
I definitely watch it every November. Of course, the first time I seen it was in the summertime.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I didn't see it in theaters. It was on one of these tapes that we had where someone had rented and recorded it. And I remember just putting it in and watching it and loving it. But now it's an every November thing.
It does sort of, I mean, this time of year, we're going to be going through these type of things in our real life. So it's probably good to have a movie that reflects some of the frustrations and reminds us to try to behave like human beings.
Yeah. Going back to John Hughes real quick. Apparently he was a fast writer. Apparently he could turn out 120 pages in like 6 days. That's crazy.
He might have the benefit of working with really brilliant people like Steve Martin and John Candy might be that you can just sort of create the framework.
Yeah.
You put all the ideas you might have into the script, and then you can let those folks go crazy with it. You can just let them run, which apparently is what he did. Maybe that's why we have an hour of extra footage.
Maybe.
But yeah, I mean, there's no denying he had a knack for doing these type of things. I'm glad. Maybe the reason why I liked this so much when I first saw it was because I had seen his other films, and I was never really a big fan of like teenage stuff.
Yeah.
I always felt like one of the reasons, like in the 30s and 40s, where there were so many great movies made, is because they focused on adults.
Right.
There were stories about adults, about people who were consequential, about there were movies were about people who had some experience in the world, and it's hard to do a movie every once in a while about young people, but to keep churning out one after the other.
Yeah.
So it was nice that he took a break from that and gave us two older people.
Yeah. Well, his other, I guess, buddy travel movie would have been Dutch.
That one I
That
didn't
was the
see.
one with it was Ed O'Neill is going to pick up his wife's son from like military school and bring him home for Christmas, and they have to travel by car to get back
Oh,
home, and they have like a little adventure.
well,
That was a good one.
was it before or after this one?
I think it was after.
Mm. Well, this was so successful. I guess it's understandable that you
Yeah.
want to give it another try. But John Candy is kind of a tough one to beat, though. I mean, it's really sad that he died as young as he did. It's sad that John Hughes died so
Oh
young as
yeah, yeah, I
well.
know.
And the funny thing is,
I almost forgot about that until I started watching some stuff today. I was like, oh yeah, he died.
I don't think he
Forgotten.
was. He died when he was 47 or something.
Yeah,
like that?
I don't think he was 50 yet. So
Yeah. And John Candy died very young as well, both from heart attacks.
yeah,
What's interesting about that is John Candy was the guy that was struggling with his weight. John Candy was the guy who you would have thought would have been the one to succumb to a heart attack.
yeah.
But John Hughes, that was a real surprise, and too bad, you know.
I guess the only other person that would have come close to John Candy would have been Chris Farley, and of course he had two similar movies of this with Tommy Boy, and I don't remember what the other one was, but it was him and David Spade traveling across the traveling
Right.
across the country in a car and having an adventure. And it was kind of a rip off of this, but
Well, I like both of those guys, but
yeah,
I have a feeling that the problem with a lot of the movies that Candy and Spade made over the years is that they seem to focus mostly on the jokes, the gags, the
yeah,
comedy moments.
physical stuff. Yeah,
Right. And I think that John Hughes, because John Hughes started with the National Lampoon, and I used to be a big fan of the National Lampoon magazine when I was a kid. And I remember reading the essays. They had like short stories and essays and parody articles and things like that. And there was a intelligence in that. I mean, National Lampoon, I assume, was an offshoot of the Harvard Lampoon.
yeah.
Harvard Lampoon is, Harvard University's humor and parody magazine.
I guess for
Uh,
everybody that know, we could say it's probably comparable to Mad Magazine, is what you would compare those two.
Yes, Mad Magazine for people that have attended colleges or
Yeah.
universities. Mad Magazine was always meant to be more, for regular folks, but National Lampoon had stuff in it that you probably couldn't appreciate unless you had a decent education.
Yeah.
So John Hughes came from that. He was a smarter guy, just to put it simply. And the folks that were writing some of the other comedies that were being done back in the 80s, I don't get the feeling that they had the same sort of grounding, and they didn't have the same level of education. They didn't have the same sophistication about things that John Hughes had. He also, I assume, he recognized the genius of John Candy, because John Candy had been on the scene for a while before he did Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And it was pretty obvious he was a brilliant comedic actor. I know you used to hear him being mentioned in the same league as some of the other heavy actors, like,
Yeah.
Oliver Hardy or Fatty Arbuckle and or Lou Costello, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just someone who's able to turn the shape and size of their body into a tool for comedy. He was a funny guy. Perhaps even if he'd been skinny, he would have been funny. But
Oh yeah.
given his size, he was that much funnier. He was just funny to look at. But yeah, it's a shame he passed when he did, and that seems to have been a tradition for a while with heavy set comedians. I mean, John Belushi and John Candy and the fellow
Chris Farley.
Chris Farley. They all seem to go on the same trajectory. I don't know if Chris Farley was a cocaine user. John Candy apparently was, and I guess John Belushi was using cocaine and a lot of other things, I'm sure. But bad combination, right?
Oh yeah.
Being morbidly obese and taking a lot of drugs, not a good thing.
No.
But anyway, he certainly made his mark. He turned out a lot of good stuff, so there's plenty to enjoy from him.
Oh yeah. What's your favorite like joke or gag in the movie?
Well, I like that scene where they're in the car. The thing that starts with him ending up on the wrong side of the road,
Yeah.
and the people trying to tell him, "You're going the wrong way," and he's going like, "Oh, they're crazy."
Yeah.
How
They
do
must
they
be
know
drunk.
which way we're going?
Yeah. Which that whole scene starts off because he's a bigger guy getting his coat stuck on the
Right,
chair, trying
yes,
to get out of it.
yes,
So
right.
it wouldn't have worked if he was skinnier or if it was Steve Martin in that part.
Right, that's right. There's weight as part of the thing, but also the fact that you see a fellow who's sort of having a moment of joy listening to that music and playing
Playing the
the
piano,
ghost
yeah.
piano on in front on the dashboard, and it's all because of that sort of state of euphoria that he's in, listening to the music, that he starts to do, stupid things like throwing the cigarette out the window and having it blow back into the back seat of the car, and ultimately getting himself. I hope they've redesigned car seats so that's not
They're
possible.
not flammable.
Well, the business of having your sleeves get hooked on
Yeah.
the various apparatus or apparati, is that the right?
Yeah.
I hope we don't still have that. We're not still running that risk.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
that whole scene right up
Yeah,
to
one of the
the
funniest moments there is when they go in between the two trucks. And I don't know if
yes,
it's like if it even fits this movie, but it's hilarious whenever
yes.
they both turn into skeletons.
Yeah,
And when Steve Martin looks over and there's John Candy in like this cheap Spirit of Halloween devil
right.
costume.
Yeah.
And it's
That
just for some reason it's funny, but I keep every time I watch it, I'm like, does that even fit this movie? Is that comedy for this movie?
well, it,
I mean, it's
it,
funny as hell. I love it.
so, yeah, that's
But it just seems really out of place when it happens.
it's I guess it's a question of when you get to a situation, a life and death situation in a company like this, you can pretty much do what you want.
Yeah.
Right. In any other situation, maybe having those little
Mm.
things cut in probably would have broken the magic of the scene. But in this, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And I just thinking about that makes me laugh, to be honest. Very, very funny scene. And that right up to the car being burned and then driving the burning wreck
Yeah.
into the motel. That to me is the best segment of the film. In as far as best laughs, heartiest laughs. How
Yes, yeah,
about you?
that's even funnier. That's like, well, that's one of my favorites. That and of course the joke I said at the beginning. But the him going to the car rental place with the 18 fucks. It's funny when it happens, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite scene. I mean, it's funny and it's it's iconic, and everybody, if you mention this movie to somebody, they're like, oh yeah, they mentioned that scene.
Right.
But I don't think it's my favorite.
Well, perhaps it's not, but that scene maybe was more impressive to audiences back when the film first came out.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't play so well now because we've had so many movies over the years where fuck is not
Well,
a
yeah.
particularly
You say it on TV now, so
right, and the woman who he's shouting at, maybe the problem there is that the audience's sympathies shift from Steve Martin to her.
yeah.
Maybe that's not such a good thing.
Yeah.
But the only thing that I find particularly objectionable about that scene is him getting punched by the guy, the taxi
The
dispatcher.
attendant, yeah.
That seemed to me to be going a little too far. I mean, they get out of it okay because John Candy is there to rescue him, and but I always feel that there's a limit to how much we want to see our comedic heroes abused.
Yeah.
And
It seemed like the only way they could introduce him and John Candy back together.
right,
To
yeah.
have him punched and fall over and almost get ran over.
Well, I wish they had, even if they had simply had the guy take a swing at him, and he when he falls back trying to get
Yeah.
out of the way, that would have avoided. John Hughes, maybe that's sort of a signature thing with him, is he seems to find people getting hit in the head very, very entertaining.
Yeah.
He certainly
like he
took
did in Home
advantage,
Alone, yeah.
right, repeatedly, right. But it's a minor quibble. I suppose if you wanted to, with these type of movies, you could fuss over every scene and say, well, it
Oh,
would have been
yeah.
funnier if you did this, or they should have left that out. But all in all, it shows a lot of savvy about, how to tell an entertaining story. And to me, it sort of harkens back. I was sort of thinking of like Sons of the Desert, I guess was the name of the Laurel and Hardy movie, about them going away against their wives' wishes, going away to a convention with their local lodge,
Yeah.
and all the complications that result from that. The idea of establishing a simple premise that you can do like comedic riffs on and still have a heart to the story, some sort of real human emotion, that to me is like a perfect thing for a comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the other joke that felt kind of slow too was when the guy picks him up by his groin.
Yeah, well,
But then there's
yeah.
too many beats before he actually does the high pitched voice when you hear him talking, so it's kind of
Right.
like it doesn't really work.
Well, I would say generally with this type of thing, given the premise of it, and given that it's all about accepting that these guys are sort of like innocent victims of circumstances,
Yeah.
we have to believe that it's all real. It has to stay on this side of believability. It can't become too far out, too weird, or too absurd, because then we stop believing in the situation. Then it's just
Yeah.
silliness on the screen. So the guy grabbing him by the balls, yeah, it's really kind of
It's-
hard to believe, because that's the sort of thing that people might be arrested for assault for, right?
Yeah. I like the jokes of like whenever the guy picks him up in the pickup truck and he spits and then wipes his mouth before he shakes Steve Martin's hand. And it's just like that's the funny stuff, because Steve Martin knows what's coming. He still does it. And
Yeah.
it's just like, that's great.
That's people dealing with sort of like socially acceptable behavior.
Yeah.
Is he going to go ahead and shake the guy's hand, even though he just saw him wipe his mouth? And of course, that character, I guess now people would probably object to that character, the guy with the tick,
Yeah.
I can't even do it. I guess you have to
Yeah.
have a head full of snot to.
Or
But
making his wife get out. That was a funny line too.
Leave it be. Get your lazy behind out here and put that trunk up in the back.
Oh, no, we've got it.
It's very heavy. She don't mind. She's short and skinny, but she's strong. Her first baby come out sideways. She didn't scream or nothing.
Isn't that something?
For her first kid came out sideways and she didn't make a noise.
Yeah, but I suppose a lot of people nowadays would object to the depiction of the good people of Wichita, or,
Yeah.
and that sort of. It is kind of it's sort of
Probably
indicative.
upsets Trump voters more than anything.
Well, I think so. Yeah, it's an indication though of what a rare time the '80s were. Everybody, the general audience, seemed to imagine themselves as being on the same level as a guy like Steve Martin in this film, with a house filled with, a beautiful house and an expensive, neighborhood, and, the loving wife and all the family, everybody looking healthy, and, just a general air of prosperity. That's the sort of thing that I think increasingly audiences would not necessarily sympathize with anymore.
And
We find it harder nowadays as we struggle to pay our rent in the little hovel that we're living in, struggling to pay for food and oil to heat our houses.
we don't care if the yuppie makes it home for Thanksgiving.
Right. And I remember feeling the same way with the Spielberg's War of the Worlds. I mean, John Hughes, you could say he had the same sort of sense of what audiences wanted to see that Spielberg had during his when he was at the height of his powers. That when you saw those guys' films with an audience, you knew that every person in the theater was in step with what was going on the screen. They understood it, they empathized, and they found it funny and real. Nowadays, I think probably that vision of what life in America is like probably wouldn't strike a responsive chord with most audiences. They would think it's kind of corny or cliched or old-fashioned, in the same way we feel that way about like 50s depictions of the typical American family.
Right, yeah.
And in War of the Worlds, they have a similar scene with Tom Cruise finally getting back to the family house where everybody's gathered, and it's a similar type of beautiful place with all the smiling faces of all the family members, and that world maybe doesn't exist anymore. I mean, well, we shouldn't say that. I mean, it does exist. It's just that the mass audience is probably not going to connect with that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, think about Home Alone. There's always been a joke that like that dad must have been a drug dealer because of the size of the house, and he's flying the entire family to
Right.
Paris or wherever they're going.
Right.
It's just a running joke of like, man, he was into something. But I guess that was like, I don't know why Hollywood makes, well, if this family's gonna have a house, it needs to be like immaculate. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
when average people probably wouldn't have a house like that.
No, I mean, and I think that the tendency to shoot on sound stages probably is part of the problem, because if you were actually in real places, even if they were the expensive homes of real people, you would probably find them much smaller and
Yeah.
more confining, and they don't want that in a movie. They want things. Even the poorest person has to live in what looks like a space the size of an airport, and you see that on TV shows as well.
Oh yeah, all the time. Every time I didn't watch Friends, but I seen some stuff and I was like, all right, they're not affording that apartment that they
Right.
live in, especially working at a coffee shop.
Right. The jobs that the people supposedly have make just the fact that they're living in that neighborhood
Yeah.
would be
I mean, on
kind of hard to believe.
Seinfeld, Kramer didn't even work
Right.
and had an apartment next to, a well-known comedian. So
Right. Yeah, times have changed. I think we've become a little more realistic. I mean, it was probably unrealistic even when those things were on the air, but the need to make sort of a romanticized version of the average person's life probably causes them to lean on the side of bigger, more elaborate sets, which was true almost of all the situation comedies. It almost felt sometimes, if you watched some of those blocks of comedy shows, that you were staying in the same place.
yeah.
It's like you're in the same studio for several hours. Just they brought in different casts, but anyway, John Hughes probably could also be criticized for the remarkable lack of diversity, not just in this film, but I think in most of his films, if not all of his films. And I guess the only possible explanation for that, it's not an excuse, but the only possible explanation is that diversity was not on anybody's mind back in the 80s,
Right, yeah.
apparently. I mean, he did, I guess the most egregious example was when he actually had an Asian character in, was it Pretty in Pink?
16 Candles?
Oh, 16 Candles? One of his films, pretty offensive depiction, almost not as bad as Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany. But if you kind of have one or two minority characters in your film, you would think you would try to make them a little more, a better representation of that group than what he ended up with there. But the audiences didn't seem to care at the time. Diversity just wasn't on anybody's radar at the time. I mean, obviously, diversity has been a problem all along, and the reason why you have like separate genres like blaxploitation films and things like that is, at least in part, an attempt to cash in on the desire to see different types of people on the screen, because they're absent usually. But in John Hughes movies, as far as I can think, I don't remember seeing too many people of color.
No.
So that's one possible flaw, and that might make the films. Because on the other hand, you could say he seemed to be trying to capture a feeling of Hollywood comedy that was backward looking, right?
Right.
He was addressing modern issues and he was doing things in a modern way, but his comedies often felt like the sort of things that maybe Preston Sturges would have been doing in his day, or any of the great comic screen comics might have been doing.
Yeah, I guess so. There's other sort of theories that like John Hughes was making his own Marvel universe because his movies have like gigantic crossovers. So like the I guess Steve Martin's business partner at the beginning that he's in the meeting with, that's the dad from Ferris Bueller.
Right.
The woman at the one at the car rental place, she's the secretary at the school from
Right.
Ferris Bueller. So there's like all these people, and then of course Kevin Bacon's little appearance at the beginning could possibly be playing the same character from She's Having a Baby.
Right.
I just wonder if does he just work with the same actors, or was he purposely putting all these characters together? I mean, even
Well,
John Candy comes back in Home Alone, and he gets the mom to ride, I guess, the rest of the way home in some kind of refrigerated truck, which is the last leg of this movie. So I was like, that's kind
Right.
of weird.
well, I mean, I suppose it's possible that he's making references to his other movies and casting these actors that he worked well with as part of that. But I mean, if people if it makes the thing more enjoyable to
Yeah.
think that that's the same Kevin Bacon from the other movie, or that, I don't, there's nothing that says that they aren't the same
Yeah.
characters, other than maybe the fact that he addresses his colleague at the advertising agency by a different name. I don't know
Right.
what
Yeah.
name he
I can't
calls him.
remember. Yeah.
But my guess is probably what it really comes down to is that most directors like Hughes who, that they have surprising success, right? Because I guess the first movie he did was like the National Lampoon Vacation movie. Was that the first one?
I don't know. Did he direct that one or just write that one?
Oh, I forget.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Well, whatever his first movie was, I'm sure he never imagined that he would become this sort of institution.
Yeah.
And, he was a major force in the industry, right? Like a brand name, which is a rare thing for filmmakers generally, but particularly for comedy filmmakers.
Yeah, during
So
the 80s, I mean, he had just hit after hit.
yeah, just
Breakfast
extraordinary.
Club, 16
Yeah.
Candles, Pretty in Pink,
And
Ferris Bueller's
they
Day
were
Off,
big
all these
hits.
movies. Oh yeah.
And they were like cultural, milestones in a way. Everybody was talking about his movies.
Yeah.
So my guess is probably it's just a question of him wanting to use people that
The
he
same
worked
actors.
well
Yeah.
with. Yeah. I mean,
I
I
know
would
I
do
watched
that.
I watched a thing about Home Alone. I know that John Candy just showed up on set and was like, and just like he paid him what they call it scale. He paid him in scale just to do the parts. He basically got paid hardly nothing.
Mhm.
And I guess they just came up with that so that they probably just thought back to the other movie. Hey, wouldn't it
Yeah.
be funny if the
Well, as far
gets
as
run
I
over
can
the refrigerated truck, that'd be funny.
as far as I can see, generally, it doesn't really add anything to the movie to think of them as these other characters.
Yeah.
So if people want, it doesn't take away, but it doesn't add anything. So if people like to make those sort of connection, I guess that's kind of an internet or a YouTube video type thing.
Yeah.
You see a lot of videos that are trying to create that sort of overall theory, like a grand theory of.
Yeah, he stopped selling shark curtain rings and started a polka band.
But yeah, I mean, I forget there was some movie that I was watching fairly recently where it turned out one of the characters. Oh, it was Star Wars. One of the stormtroopers in one of the scenes is. I'm glad I brought this up.
Yeah.
The guy that played the lead in Prince of the City, Treat Williams. Was it Treat Williams? I think it was Treat Williams. He was dating Carrie Fisher, or he knew Carrie Fisher, and he just, it was in Empire Strikes Back, because he happened to be in England doing some other movie. And I think it was Treat Williams. It was some famous movie star. Somebody became a famous movie star.
Yeah.
And she just said, well, why don't you just, do a little walk on here or be in the background? And he did, apparently. So that's something.
Yeah.
I don't know how that adds to this discussion, but that does happen from time to time. But at the end of Planes, Trains, there's when we see his family, and there's an older man there who I recognize. I don't know if I recognize him from sitcoms
You
or,
recognized him from, he was the dad on Frasier.
oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was the,
Oh, son of
so
a
what's his
gun.
name? John Mahoney or something like that.
See, I didn't see him long enough to really, I know,
Yeah.
I thought, could that be something
Yeah, he's
I
got
know?
that look. Every time I see him, I'm like, that's the dad from Frasier.
And also William Wyndham, who I did recognize as the
Yeah.
executive at the beginning of the film. Why he's uncredited, I don't know. Maybe because he doesn't have any lines, but it's an amusing little performance. And
Yeah.
of course, Ben Stein, who I wish I didn't know, he shows up, and that was
Yeah, he
before
was also in Ferris Bueller's. He was a
right.
teacher.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was, I guess, his great claim to fame.
But you could say he plays the same character in everything
Pretty
because
much,
he's
yeah.
just the same.
Just a whining voice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very entertaining film, and it's heartwarming and
Oh yeah. The ending always gets me every time.
very touching. Yeah.
Tear up every time.
Yeah.
It's that fucking song they play.
Hello, Mrs. Page.
Every time you go, take a piece of me with you.
And then they just cut to John Candy like fiddling with his hat, bending the bill
Yes,
while he's standing there
yes.
waiting, and then they freeze frame on. And I don't know if it got worse after he died when they freeze frame on John Candy at the end. I always wait for like the in memory of or whatever at the end.
Well,
Which I'm surprised
fortunately,
they haven't added that since he died. But
well, hopefully they won't, because I don't
Yeah.
think
It would
think
take
John
away from
Candy would
there.
want that either. The movies, I mean, everybody's dead in the old movies, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that bothers me is when folks are talking about old movies and they say, oh, and it starred the late Betty Davis.
Yeah.
See, Betty Davis has been the late Betty Davis for the past several decades. When are you gonna, what's the point of making that designation? And there, you don't do it like if you're discussing history. You don't say the late Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
because everybody sort of figures, yeah, by now he would be
He's-
late.
Yeah.
He died a little sooner than he might have otherwise, but movies from the 40s and 50s, you pretty much figure most of the people in those movies have passed on. But planes, trains, and automobiles, maybe the great pleasure of it is that it is so simple.
Oh yeah.
So many times, as we talked about movies over the past couple of years, the simplicity of the best films is what is remarkable. To pare things down to the stuff that's interesting, the stuff that's dramatic, the stuff that's funny, rather than having this sort of overstuffed thing, which unfortunately streaming shows tend to push us in that direction. Right?
Yeah.
It seems like people are always looking for more.
Yeah, this is like all the characters are great. All the characters feel real. There's nobody in this movie that you're going, that's not a real character.
Right.
Like the waitresses and the cab driver,
Right.
the hotel attendant, like they're all perfect. And the jokes are, other than like I said, like the skeleton and the devil suit, the rest of the jokes are kind of low key and they're not like, it's just, it's funny. It's brilliant. It's
We
so
can-
simple.
We can imagine it happening to us, which is
Yeah,
what
you can
right?
relate to him.
Right.
I'm relating to Steve Martin when he doesn't really want to talk to anybody, and I don't want, what I'm saying, I'm that way. If I'm, on the bus, I don't know you, and I don't want to talk to you, and then I'm relating to John Candy a little bit. It's great. I mean, that's a great movie.
Well, I suppose I relate to John Candy because I'm generally an introvert, but I tend towards being a bit of a blabbermouth if I
Right.
feel that I'm in a, out of nervousness or
Yeah.
a desire to ingratiate myself to people. So all of his little stories about shower curtain rings, I can sort of see myself doing that.
Yeah,
So-
the one thing he does that I would never be able to forgive would be taking a sock off and banging it in my face.
Yes, that is
Even
going
even the hands in the pillow thing was. I'll let that go before I let the sock in my face go.
Well, that is a funny scene too. I guess the music helps, right? Or they're playing Back in Baby's
Back in
Arms.
baby's
again.
arms, yeah.
So it's good stuff. Probably more enjoyable for people than listening to us talk about it as far as
Probably, yeah.
actually watch it. But
Yeah.
I guess most people will probably be doing that this Thanksgiving anyway, because it's on streaming service on Paramount Plus, I guess.
I watched it on Paramount Plus. It was a decent copy. It was
Yeah, I thought it was
noticed it
pretty
was
good.
on, I think Roku channel, I think has it, and maybe the Pluto TV. I can't remember.
Well, YouTube, I think, is selling it, and I imagine you could probably get it on for sale on Prime. I don't know if you're not going to
Yeah.
get it for free, but
And you
if
can still get I was looking up the 4K copy today. Walmart still has the Blu-ray. They can get it on Blu-ray like
Blu-ray.
the before the special edition, still available on Blu-ray, and of course they got the special, which should be coming out this week, I think.
the 4K one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually probably today. What's today? Tuesday? Probably come out today.
Now these 4Ks, when they come out, do they have like a backwards compatible Blu-ray included?
Yeah,
or-
they should. They should, because you should get the 4K, the Blu-ray, and then a digital copy. Just like if you buy a Blu-ray, you get a Blu-ray, a DVD, and a physical and a digital copy. So
Yeah, I mean, nowadays you would expect that because 4K hasn't exactly taken off yet.
no, it's still
so-
kind of the players are still kind of pricey. But like,
Oh, we
yeah,
get the idea.
I recommend Planes Train. I recommend everybody watch it. Thanksgiving, Christmas. I discovered the summertime. You can watch it in the summertime. It's that enjoyable.
That's good.
There's never going to be another John Hughes. There's never going to be another John Candy. So
Yeah,
to have
no,
these two guys together on this movie, yeah,
it's,
they did other things, but
yeah, it's a great match, and I'm glad that they weren't tempted to do sequels. I mean,
yeah,
Uncle Buck aside, I guess it's not similar type of thing in a way, but it's they never succumbed to the temptation to go back and try this again,
yeah,
which is probably a good thing. It should be by itself a singular, thing.
it's
So,
perfect.
definitely.
Ending's perfect. I love it. It's great.
Mhm. Yes.
And you already mentioned one of your movies. Where can everybody find your other movies at?
Well, Sleepless Nights is on Amazon Prime, and as a pay-per-view title, it's on Plex TV, and probably more platforms coming soon. Demon Resurrection, my other horror film, is on Amazon and Tubi and Plex and Momedu and a bunch of others. That was far too many for me to.
Yeah, that's because the ending of the show is going to be hours and hours just naming off streaming
Yeah.
services.
Well, if you want to see it, probably if you have a few dollars and you want to buy the thing, you can get it on Amazon Prime or on Vimeo. And if you're too cheap to buy it, then you can watch it on Tubi. That's probably the easiest one. It's also on Roku and a few others that are pretty easy to access.
And Sleepless Nights still not on Tubi.
Sleepless Nights, not yet. No, Well, Sleepless Nights has a certain disadvantage in that it's 4:3.
Yeah,
And trying to shop around a 4:3 movie that was shot in originally shot in standard definition, it's a tough call. I mean, Amazon Prime pretty much accepts for the pay-per-view side, they accept pretty much anything that looks like a movie.
yeah,
But the other platforms like Tubi, they don't seem. I mean, they run some 4:3, square Academy aspect ratio movies, but it's a harder sell.
yeah. You should try Shudder. I recently watched the last broadcast on there, and it's all 4:3.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
But they have an advantage. And everybody knows that
Yeah.
movie. That's the big problem. That's probably a discussion for another episode.
yeah.
But the problem of trying to it doesn't become a question anymore of what's good or bad. I mean, they have it down to a science. I heard somebody speaking about this recently. 50% of the audience tunes out if they see a movie's in black and white.
Yeah,
70% tune out if the movie has subtitles. That breaks my heart when I hear that.
yeah, I know.
But and I don't know where 4:3 movies would fit into that. But I know that, for instance, the Sci-Fi Channel, which used to run old movies all the time, they gave up on old movies in favor of shitty new movies.
making their new crappy movies.
I mean, some of the stuff they do is high quality, but most of the stuff is,
yeah.
stuff that you could watch with one eye.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
And
just
that
because
seems
it's
to be the
16 by
issue.
9 doesn't mean you can just have a shitty storyline about a mega
Unfor-
shark.
Right. Well, unfortunately, the audience seems to have the feeling, and I suppose I can understand this. I mean, not everybody is interested in movie and the technical
Yeah.
aspects of movies. So you come home after a hard day's work, you plop down into your chair, and you turn on the TV and there's a tiny little picture and it's all dark and you know,
Mhm.
and it's like, oh fuck this, who cares if it's any good?
Yeah.
Turn on Sci-Fi Channel and you got a splendid full color, sharp, high definition image. So it's a stupid story. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But you're not watching for the story anyway. Probably you'll turn it off in 15 minutes and
Probably.
or you'll be asleep.
Yeah, doze off.
So they don't. I remember a producer friend of mine who had some dealings with the Sci-Fi Channel. He pretty much told them that they're looking for movies that will be for pizza parties.
Yeah.
That you don't have to really even pay attention to the dialogue. You know.
It's background noise.
And I appreciate their honesty. They're in business. They're
yeah.
not interested in art. And I'm not singling out the Sci-Fi Channel. It's true of all these channels. Right?
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
So that maybe that tendency towards going for the easy money, you know, maybe why the country is in the shape it's in.
Probably. Yeah.
But there are other countries that are in worse shape. So I guess we should be.
Yeah.
We have things to be thankful for on this.
Oh yeah, we do.
Yes.
Right. I recommend everybody watch Sleepless Nights, Demon Resurrection
Thank you.
during Thanksgiving, during Christmas, during the summertime.
I think you might have been
They're
the
good
only one to
anytime.
watch Sleepless Nights so far. But it's always
I'm pretty sure-
encouraging.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure other people have seen them.
It's always
Yeah.
encouraging when you send free copies around to folks and you never hear from them
You
again.
never hear from yeah.
Oh, well, that's a good sign, right? But anyway, it is what it is.
All right, so we both recommend this movie, and we both
Yes.
enjoyed. You said it's your favorite John Hughes movie.
And probably my favorite Steve Martin.
Steve Martin
film,
movie, yeah.
I think, yeah.
Again,
And
probably
I
that's
guess John Kennedy
yeah.
as well.
Oh
be-
yeah, that's my favorite John Candy Steve Martin movie. I don't know if it's my favorite John Hughes movie there or not, but
Well,
he got some good ones.
I'm speaking from distant memory because I
Yeah,
haven't watched
yeah.
most of his movies for many years. In fact, I hadn't watched this movie since it was back on VHS.
Oh really?
So it was a real pleasure to go back and see that it is still as good as I remembered it.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, I watch it every year. So for you, this must have been like almost like watching it for the first time experience.
It felt, yeah, a lot of stuff that I had forgotten about, but you know, it is a very, very charming movie, and the fact that it has such a good heart and makes it you feel good watching it, which
Oh yeah,
it's a relief these days.
I think I fell in love with it when it made me cry. I was like, oh, this movie made me cry.
That-
There's something
yeah.
special about that there.
Anything that can get that sort of reaction from you has to have something going for it. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
absolutely. So yes, two thumbs up.
Yep, 2 thumbs up. Yep. All right, well, this is a good episode, and then until next week, we will continue to watch the good, the bad, and the should be made.
Take care.
We can laugh about it now. We're all right.